It wasn't the first time Samuel had found himself standing at the edge of the sprawling estate where he grew up. The mansion loomed before him, its stone walls and iron gates an imposing reminder of the life he had left behind. For years, the estate had been his entire world, a symbol of the wealth and power his family had wielded for generations. But now, as he gazed at it from a distance, it felt more like a prison than a home. Samuel had walked away from it all a decade ago. The estate, the inheritance, the prestige, it had all been his for the taking. But something inside him had always felt wrong about it. For years, he had been groomed to take over the family business, the towering empire built by his father and grandfather before him. The pressure to succeed, to continue the family legacy, had weighed on him since childhood. But the more he saw of his family's world, the more he realized that wealth and power came with a heavy price, one that he was no longer willing to pay. The decision to walk away hadn't come easily. Samuel's entire life had been carefully planned from the moment he was born. He was the only son of the Warrington family, heirs to one of the most powerful business empires in the country. The family fortune had been amassed through generations of hard work, cunning, and, as Samuel later discovered, ruthless ambition. Every move, every decision had been made with one goal in mind: to maintain the Warrington name as a symbol of wealth and influence. As a boy, Samuel had admired his father, Richard Warrington. To the outside world, Richard was a charismatic and successful businessman, a man who seemed to have it all: money, power, and respect. But behind closed doors, Samuel saw another side of his father, one consumed by ambition and control. Richard was the kind of man who valued profit over people, power over relationships. He had no qualms about using others, manipulating them to get what he wanted, even if it meant sacrificing friendships and loyalty. Samuel grew up surrounded by luxury, private tutors, extravagant vacations, and the best schools money could buy. But it wasn't the material wealth that shaped him. It was the relentless pressure to live up to his father's expectations. From an early age, Samuel was groomed to be the next heir, the one who would take over the empire and expand it even further. Every decision he made, every friendship he formed, was scrutinized through the lens of how it would benefit the family. But something in Samuel rebelled against the life he was born into. As a teenager, he began to see the cracks in the seemingly perfect facade of his family's empire. He saw how his father treated people, employees, business partners, even friends, as pawns in his endless pursuit of more. The family business thrived on greed, corruption, and backroom deals. The more Samuel learned, the more he realized that the wealth his family had built was not just the result of hard work, but of betrayal and manipulation. The turning point came when Samuel uncovered the truth about one of his father's most trusted business deals. It was a merger that had catapulted the family business to the next level, securing their place as one of the most powerful corporations in the country. On the surface, it seemed like a brilliant move, one that had earned Richard Warrington praise and admiration from the business world. But Samuel, who had just started working for the company, found documents that told a different story. His father had betrayed his closest business partner, a man who had been like a brother to him for years. Richard had manipulated the deal, ensuring that his partner's company would be swallowed up by the Warrington Empire, leaving the man bankrupt and humiliated. It had been a calculated move, one that secured Richard's dominance in the industry but destroyed a lifelong friendship in the process. When Samuel confronted his father about it, Richard didn't deny it. In fact, he seemed almost proud of what he had done. "It's business, Samuel," Richard had said, his tone cold and dismissive. "You can't let emotions get in the way of success. You'll learn that one day." But Samuel couldn't accept that. He couldn't live with the knowledge that his family's fortune had been built on the backs of betrayal and greed. The more he tried to reconcile the world he had grown up in with his own values, the more he realized that he couldn't. His father's vision of success wasn't just ruthless, it was toxic. And Samuel wanted no part of it. The final straw came during a family dinner, when Richard announced that Samuel would be taking over a new division of the company, a major promotion that would secure his place as the next leader of the Warrington Empire. The entire family had celebrated the news, but Samuel felt a growing sense of dread. He knew what was expected of him. He knew the kind of man his father wanted him to become. And he knew deep down that he could never be that man. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Samuel packed a small bag, grabbed his keys, and left the estate without looking back. He didn't leave a note, didn't say goodbye. He just walked away. From the money, the power, the expectations, and disappeared. For the first time in his life, Samuel was free. But freedom came with a price. First, it was exhilarating. He moved to a small coastal town, far from the world of high society and corporate boardrooms. He found work in a local bookstore, earning just enough to get by. The simplicity of his new life was a stark contrast to the luxury he had grown up in, but it was exactly what he needed. For the first time, he felt like he was living on his own terms, not someone else's. But as the months passed, the weight of what he had left behind began to creep in. The money, the privilege, the access to opportunities, it was all gone. Samuel found himself struggling with the reality of living paycheck to paycheck, something he had never experienced before. And then there was the loneliness. He had cut ties with his family, with the world he had known for so long. And while he didn't regret his decision, the isolation sometimes felt overwhelming. The hardest part, though, was the knowledge that he had left his younger sister, Isabel, behind. Isabel had always been different from the rest of the family. Gentler, less consumed by the hunger for power. But she had been caught in the same web of expectations, and Samuel feared that without him, she would be pulled even deeper into their father's world. Years passed, and while Samuel found peace in his simple life, the guilt over abandoning Isabel grew. He had walked away from the family's toxic legacy, but she had stayed, tethered to the very world he had escaped. He had hoped that by leaving, he might inspire her to do the same, but instead, it seemed as though she had been pulled further into their father's orbit. One day, out of the blue, Samuel received a letter from Isabel. It was brief, but its contents shook him to his core. "Father is sick," she had written. "He doesn't have much time left. I think you should come home." Samuel hadn't set foot on the estate since the night he left, and the thought of returning filled him with dread. But Isabel's letter stirred something in him. Despite everything that had happened, despite the betrayal and the lies, he couldn't deny that his family was still his family. And if his father was truly dying, there were things that needed to be said. When Samuel finally returned to the estate, it was like stepping into a different world. The house was the same, but everything felt colder, emptier. His father, once so imposing and powerful, was now frail and bedridden, a shadow of the man he had been. Samuel had always imagined what it would be like to face his father again, to confront him about everything that had happened. But now, seeing him so weak, the anger he had carried for years began to fade. Richard Warrington, on his deathbed, looked up at Samuel with a mixture of surprise and regret. "You came back," Richard whispered, his voice barely audible. Samuel nodded, unsure of what to say. The room was filled with silence, thick with unspoken words and unresolved pain. I never wanted this for you," Richard said. His eyes clouded with emotion. "I thought I was doing what was best. For the family. For you." Samuel felt a lump rise in his throat. He had spent so long hating his father for the choices he had made, for the way he had twisted their family's legacy into something dark and destructive. But now, in this moment, he saw the man behind the power, the man who had been consumed by his own ambition and had lost his way. "I didn't want that life," Samuel said quietly, his voice trembling. "I couldn't be like you." Richard closed his eyes, a single tear slipping down his cheek. "I know," he whispered. "I see that now." They sat in silence for what felt like hours, the weight of their shared history hanging between them. There were no grand apologies, no dramatic reconciliation, just the quiet acknowledgement of two men who had been shaped by the same legacy, but had chosen different paths. In the end, Samuel had walked away from the inheritance not just to escape his father's world, but to find himself. And now, as his father lay dying, Samuel realized that walking away had been the only way to break the cycle of betrayal and greed that had defined their family for generations. As he stood to leave, his father reached out, his hand trembling. Take care of your sister, Richard said, his voice barely above a whisper. Samuel nodded, holding his father's hand for a moment before gently letting go. He walked out of the room, knowing he had made peace with his past. Now it was time to help his sister find her way, just as he had found his. As he left the estate for the final time, Samuel felt lighter, free from the chains of his family's legacy.